What's up guys, welcome back to Deck Tech for Decks, and today we're doing a deck tech on Borborygmos and Fblthp. Look how happy that guy is to have a friend. About as happy as I was when they spoiled this card, right? Now we have a lands commander that tickles the brain a little bit. There's some honestly nutty stuff we can do with this guy. Just to give you a little taste of what this deck is going to look like, we run Synergies and Slogurk. Now, whenever we discard 3 lands, we're going to get 3 counters on Slogurk and throw them back to our hands. Additionally, Synergies is going to go ahead and get us 3 treasure tokens so we can recast Slogurk. Now we can just keep filling our hand full of lands. Additionally, we do run a lot of sack lands. That way our lands are just going to be in the graveyard already. You know, Evolving Wilds, Terramorphic Expanse, stuff like that. Okay, well now we can do damage consistently, but I really want to do damage to someone's face. Well, Turoff can go ahead and take care of that. Now whenever we do access damage to one of our opponent's creatures, we're going to have Turoff here deal damage directly to their face. So, if this sounds interesting to you and you want to get into this deck tech, let's get into it. Let's start off by talking about the unique synergies this commander has and why it excites me so much. First, we have Life from the Loam. Really good in any deck that wants to bring lands from the graveyard to your hand. But with our commander, he draws cards on attack and ETB. Additionally, he discards cards. So we're going to be able to discard 3 lands every turn and get Life from the Loam back to our hand every turn, giving us those 3 lands back to our hand. We now have an endless amount of lands to machine gun down all of our opponent's creatures. Slogurk and Synergies are this on steroids. You discard 3 lands, create 3 treasure tokens, and Slogurk will get 3 counters. You bounce Slogurk back to your hand and cast him with the 3 treasure tokens. Again, this gives you an endless amount of lands to activate your commander's ability. Additionally, if we throw something like Borborygmos Enraged or Seismic Assault into this equation, that just becomes infinite damage and our opponents are gonna die. Abundance, another card that works so well because our commander is gonna draw us that card, right? We'll draw the card and then discard any amount of lands cards. Well, with Abundance on the battlefield, we can ensure that we're drawing a land card so that we can then discard it to do some damage. We can use Dice and Creeping Renaissance to return all of our lands to our hand. Additionally, Pair of Dice is just really solid. You're going to get a lot of cards back from your graveyard with this card. Renin 7 is also a super solid pickup here because he's going to put a lot of those land cards into your hand. Additionally, he can't just start creating some massive creatures. We can use Nylea's intervention to do some really solid damage in this deck. Not only is this going to do a lot of damage when we discard all of those land cards to our commander, it also lets us pick what land cards we want. So we're going to get all of those sacrifice lands into our hand. That way, whenever we're casting lands from our graveyard, they end up right back in the graveyard, which is where we want them. Cura the Boundless guy works similarly. We're going to get those 3 land cards, which is really the sweet spot for this deck. Discarding 3 lands is going to let us do 6 damage with our commander to a creature, which is going to kill like 90% of the creatures in the commander format. And yes, I did just make those statistics up. Cura can also be solid late game when we have a ton of lands because we can just drop a massive creature onto the board. Trade routes, not ideal, but when we need lands in our hand, we need lands in our hand. Additionally, it's really good with Life from the Loam, right? Because drawing a card is going to trigger that dredge ability, putting it back in our hand. Additionally, it works really good with Abundance because you can just draw a land card into a land card into a land card and basically fill your graveyard full of lands. This is probably a solid point to mention. We do run Cavalier of Flames in here. Not only can it give our creatures haste, it can draw us some cards while discarding cards we don't need. It also deals a ton of damage to our opponents whenever it dies because of the massive amount of land cards that are going to end up in our graveyard. Turoff, God of Fury. This is going to be a really solid way to make sure our commander does damage with his ability instead of just killing creatures, right? Because that's what we really want to do and what people said they wish this commander does, but hey, we can make that happen. The equipment side of this card is not really important for the deck, but it can be niche removal if we need it. Brash Taunter and Stuffy Doll are also going to be insane in the deck because, again, we can use our commander to deal damage to them, and then that damage is going to be dealt straight to our opponents. Notably, Brash Taunter, we can have it fight our commander for them to take an additional 6 damage, which sounds pretty fun to me. Solfim Mayhem Dominus is also super solid because it's going to double up on our commander's damage. Not to mention, if we do damage to Stuffy Doll while this Dominus is on the battlefield, it's going to be like quadruple damage, right? Because your commander's going to trigger, let's say we discard 3 lands, we do 6 damage to Stuffy Doll, that's going to double to 12. Then the damage Stuffy Doll does to our opponent is going to double as well. So that's going to deal a total of 24 damage to our opponent's face. Let's move on to playing lands from our graveyard because honestly, a lot of them are going to end up there and we want to discard the lands we play for turn anyway, that way we get value with our commander. Conduit of Worlds, super solid card. I've been throwing it in more of my decks, and honestly, it's been performing really well. It gets your key pieces back from the graveyard, and you just get the added effect to play lands from your graveyard. Remnant Excavator, Crucible of Worlds, and Ancient Green Warden are just going to be solid cards that let us play lands from our graveyard. Additionally, Ancient Green Warden will double up on our landfall effects, which we do run a few in the deck. We also run Azusa's Lost But Seeking and Mina and Den. This way we can cast those sacrifice lands, such as Evolving Wilds, an insane amount of time, really being able to abuse these graveyard effects to their maximum, right? Because honestly, Azusa Lost But Seeking does nothing if you have no lands in your hand. But now, since our graveyard is full of lands, playing 3 lands every turn consistently, because you cast Evolving Wilds, sack it ends up back in your graveyard, you cast it again, and boom, you've got 3 lands onto the battlefield. Let's move on to the core of this deck. We have Displacer Kitten. This is going to be super solid because blinking our commander means drawing more cards, and you can, every time we blink him, activate that land discard ability again. Sword of Feast and Famine is going to be super solid in this deck. One, Sword of Feast and Famine is really good in almost any deck, but it's even better when you're throwing a lot of lands onto the battlefield. Additionally, our commander wants to be attacking. This guy's aggressive. This is going to turn him from a 6-5 to an 8-7, and now he's not that far away from commander damage, plus black and green are solid protection colors. Sword of Hearth and Home, another solid one, right? This is going to be able to blink our commander to activate him additional times while ramping us. Notably though, if you do have this equipped onto your commander and you blink him, it is going to unequip the sword, so make sure you think about that when you're equipping it. Swiftfoot Boots and Lightning Greaves, again, we want to protect our commander. That's kind of the bread and butter of the deck. Eternal Witness, Genesis, and Bala Ged Recovery are just solid cards that are going to give us access to our graveyard. One of the problems I have with Genesis in general is sometimes it can be hard to get him into your graveyard, but it's not going to be hard to get him into your graveyard with this deck, because even if you're forced to cast this guy, we can use our commander to kill him. Glasspool Mimic can just be a solid card. It comes in handy more than you think. Either you're copying a Reclamation Sage and destroying someone's artifacts, or just getting some additional ETB creatures, maybe even a Cure of Boundless Sky, right? Then it'll kill itself and we'll get the activation right away. This card's really versatile, and I like shoving it into blue decks. Defense of the Heart. Now, I don't condone running this with any 2-card combos, right? It kind of feels, bad. You win out of nowhere and then nobody has fun. But I justified it by saying surely Badgesaur and Slowgurk do not go infinite on their own. They need a 3rd card to make that happen. So that's my line, and that's why I included it in the deck. Additionally, this can be really good with Azusa's Lost But Seeking and Ramna Excavator. Now you're just ramping a ton every turn. So there are some other options. This card can be very versatile. I also threw Worldly Tutor, Mystical Tutor, and Gamble in the deck, right? Just to get that life from the loan where you really need it. And then Worldly Tutor can either get our Slowgurk or our Shirley Badgesaur. This deck is pretty good, but it needs some consistency to make it work, and these tutors are going to give it that. Let's go over the ramp in the deck. Lotus Cobra and Tireless Provisioner are going to ramp us whenever those land enters the battlefield. Notably, Tireless Provisioner is a little more useful because you get those treasure tokens, but Lotus Cobra comes down early. Those sack lands are going to be really good here because you're netting 2 mana per 1 sack land. Sword of Forge and Frontier, another thing that 1, protects our commander, and 2, it's gonna ramp us while giving us some impulse draw. This card does almost everything the deck wants to do. Then we have your standard early ramp with Nature's Lore, Farseek, and 3 visits. We also run Cultivate and Kodama's Reach. Not only will this get us ramp, but it's also going to put lands into our hand, which can be really meaningful in this deck. We also run all 4 Signets and Soul Ring. Now, I know some people are going to be like, it's a land deck, why are you including the Signets? And honestly, it's because you can't beat that value. Ramping on turn 2 can be amazing. So the Signets just make it to where you end up with a more consistent deck where you can do what the deck wants to do more consistently. Moving on to card draw, we have Reel the Everwise. I really like this girl because now whenever we're discarding those land cards, we're drawing cards. Additionally, she can get pretty massive. This giant sea monster and her merfolk friend are now just gonna let us draw cards whenever those lands are entering the battlefield. Additionally, the giant snake can let us play additional lands, so it synergizes with itself. Teamer Ascendancy and Elemental Bond will draw us a card whenever those big creatures are entering the battlefield. Notably, we do run quite a bit. Remember, we are gonna be blinking the crap out of our commander, Tatiana, Protector of Argoth. Whenever we sacrifice those sacrifice lands, we're going to get that 5/3, which is going to trigger both of these as well. Plus, haste is pretty solid. Rishkar's Expertise is also going to be really solid in the deck, especially with abundance on the battlefield, right? Now we'll just get 6 lands straight to our hand. Our commander is going to be pretty massive, and if we just need to draw the cards, we can just draw 6 cards. Additionally, we do get to cast a free card off of this. The Great Henge and Guardian Projects, more solid cards that are going to draw us cards whenever we're blinking our commander or just casting those creature spells. Lastly, we run Sylvan Library, a super solid card to really just churn us through our deck. Moving on to removal, our commander is going to cover the brunt of it, but we do have some stuff if he starts slacking. Reclamation Sage is going to keep any of those artifacts and enchantments off the battlefield. Beast Within can keep any permanent off the battlefield. Blasphemous Act is going to help us out if the board gets out of control. Notably, if we have Sword of Forge and Frontier equipped, it's not going to affect our commander. Azorius Predation, really solid for those token strategies, right? People create a massive board state of 1/1s, and now we have a massive board state of 4/4s, and they have nothing. I really like catching people off guard with this card. Bane of Progress, another guy that just puts in work. Those artifact commanders, those treasure token strategies, they're all screwed with this guy on the battlefield. Notably, Sithis is not going to do much against him. We also run Shatterskull Smashing and Colony Ambush for some solid MDFC flexibility. Now, if we need them for removal, we have them for that, and if we need to ramp, we have them for that. Super solid cards. That's going to do it for the deck tech, guys. Let me know what you think. I really had fun building this deck. Honestly, I'm thinking about adding this to my personal collection just because of how unique it is. As always, guys, let me know what you think about the deck tech. Let me know about any cards you think would also be amazing in the deck. I hope this helped you in your deck building endeavors, and I'll see you in the next one.